Okay. Members of the public, questions or comments on that? Yes, Thomas.
I have one little question. I'm Tom from Tama County. I've always wondered, it seemed like an overreach to me, knowing some of the water laws in Tama County anyway, they might be different, but access to waterways. This does not set good with me. Most land in Tama County go to the center of creeks, okay? That means you are authorizing people to go on private property or take private property, and I think that should need to be in here.
Okay, so
That's all I have to say.
we can reflect that in the notes, the concern that access to waterways would mean accessing private property. So definitely that will be reflected in the notes in the tax discussion.
And just to comment to that, I think the comment, if it's the same one that I read, is reflecting what you're saying, that I don't like to have people walking through the orchard to get to the creek. And yes, thank you.
Yeah, and just again to reiterate what Leigh said, this plan is not intended to change anybody's property rights or to provide anything that is not already provided legally. So this board cannot change anything about your property rights or access to your property.
But that makes precedence in some of these cases. When a judge reads this, that this organization here that's representing the people for now, anyway, is saying, oh, water issues there, they want access to all water. If that's in enough documentation, that's law in some cases.
Duly noted. Thank you for pointing that out. This is why we do public outreach. You know, the consultants put together a list of things like, are these issues for people? And we're getting public comments back saying, not only is it not an issue, but we're afraid that this could have a negative impact. This is exactly what we want from our public outreach. Thank you. So Ray was next, and then ma'am.
And Laura, at the TAC meeting, you had a list of requirements of Proposition 64.
Prop 84.
84. And this board recognizes the water issues, but what about all the others, such as sustainable development, climate change? I don't see anything being reflected to this board that they're going to have to, that they're going to make a plan for, that the bureaucrats are going to have to follow Agenda 84 money.
Okay. So
can you explain to them that they're not just making a decision on water?
So this, I think, is a conception that Proposition 84, the bond 84, has money in it for things like sustainable development. I think climate change is mentioned. Climate change does have to be addressed by this plan, and as I understand it, Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong, what this plan has to say about climate change is, do you anticipate that what you have planned is going to have an impact on climate, and you considered that? And if so, what are you doing about it? So it's just about what would the impact of this plan be on climate change. It's not about creating a plan for the 6 counties on dealing with climate change. It's just about, DWR wants to make sure that you considered, you know, for example, if your plan said we want to devote a lot of water towards fracking that would release gas into the atmosphere, that we consider that. So that's what this kind of would talk about. Just do these actions, and I don't think that action would be in this plan, but this is an example that came to mind of how a water plan might impact climate. So they just want to know that you considered it. If you look at your plan and say we don't think it has any impact on climate change, that's what you put in your analysis. So that's all you have to say about climate change. What does this plan affect? Then let me get you into a second there, Stan. And then the other piece of what you're saying is, someone brought up at the last TAC meeting that Proposition 84 includes money for things like forestry and sustainable development. If this board does a water plan, are you then also obligated to do something around forestry, sustainable development, or the other things that are mentioned in Prop 84? Steve, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, the answer is no. So I disagree. Let me stand up. In front. Somewhere around we have on one of these boards, I think, a list of the 16 elements you were talking about. Let me see if I've got them here. Yeah, here they are. And for the most part, this is just a checklist. And I think as we briefed the board and the TAC over the last year, we envision that each one of these would be a chapter in the plan. You can organize the plan any way you want, but each one of these has to be addressed. And climate change could simply be, for example, a checklist about whether the water resources are vulnerable to changes in climate or whether this plan does anything. There's a process for doing that, but it's not a real big deal. Coordination is just simply, is there a public outreach process? Are you coordinating amongst each other? Most of these are pretty basic and straightforward. There is some technical work, data management, the finance plan, project review process. So this is really, these are in the detailed guidelines that DWR adopted that are required of each plan. But each plan is going to be addressing things differently. One of the things we learned in working with the board and TAC is that the governance structure of every one of the 43 plans in the state is completely different, reflecting the governance leadership that exists in every region. What is working here is far different than works in Bakersfield or, as you mentioned, Riverside or anywhere else. So I hope that answered, more than answered the question.
So those 16 elements are specific to a water plan that this board would develop. Sam, you wanted to talk?
Well, I just wanted to comment that, in response to that gentleman's comment, what we're discussing here today are not necessarily an all-inclusive list of the components going to be in the plan. What we're discussing are the comments and input we've had from the public. This is, I don't think we've talked about anything that may come from the board itself today. And certainly we haven't decided what are going to be our goals and objectives to be included in the plan. So we're just not there yet. What we're talking about today are the comments we've heard from the public.
Right. Working towards those goals and objectives. That's the chapter that we're trying to get to now. A very fundamental chapter on goals and objectives. Any other comments from the board before I go back to the public? Other comments in the public? So, Thomas, I want to get people who haven't spoken yet. So, you had your hand up, ma'am, in the
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the public access issue that was talked about before the gentleman's comment, and natural injuries on family water lines. I think on the other side, while I wholeheartedly agree with private property rights value, another concern for many people in the community or these communities are to assure that public lands, existing public lands, are maintained in such a way that the public can continue to access the river. So that state parks and all those other lands and programs and those types of facilities are maintained so that we can still have a way to access the river. It was a big concern in Volusia County with the river that is meandering away from the program, and to ensure that those facilities are again maintained in such a way that we can still get to the river.
Thank you. So we'll also reflect that in the notes for the TAC consideration that it may be about access to public waterways on public land. So let me get a series of hands, people who wanted to speak, and I'll give you a number. I think, sir, you had your hand up, number 1. Number 2, you haven't spoken yet. Ma'am, number 3, and then back to you, Thomas. So
You
number
missed.
1? Oh, I'm sorry. And then number 5. Okay?
Yeah, in reading the Rapoza Daily News article in January's Rapoza meeting of the disruptors, there was one fellow at the end of the article that said, well, we'll defend our water rights, our personal water rights, with a gun if we have to. In imagining the larger picture of the state of California, aggregate versions of this panel, the larger picture, if you will, I was trying to picture in my mind why the individual thought, what the individual imagined that he would be using the gun to defend it himself against, since it's basically a bureaucratic process. I kind of got a cartoon image in my mind of, some kind of gigantic bunch of cartoon figures from Southern California and guys shooting, shooting at them or something, or shooting into the water, if you will. And in trying to interpret what the man's reality vision was, I couldn't understand who he thought he'd be defending himself and his water rights against. Because clearly this is not the only such panel. There are 58 counties in California. I don't know personally, even though I should by now, the total configuration of who the decision makers are. But it strikes me that in the long term of South versus North decision making, it's not only not the state legislature and the federal government, but it's an aggregate of Historic Bureau of Reclamation and farmer already existing contracts. to really boil down, what I'm asking is, or I'm not really asking a question, because in that man's interpretation, he maybe just have been asking an unanswerable question, but who did he imagine he was going to use a gun to defend himself against? Like some guy, he usually comes up to some poor worker coming up on his land who has nothing to do with the bureaucratic process. He's just a day agent, if you will. I'm sorry to present you with another unanswerable question, but can anyone enlighten me on who the guy imagined he was going to defend himself against?
I certainly can't answer that. I can't read mine, but if anybody on the board wants to respond. Thank you, sir. We didn't get your name?
The name is Doug Ross, D-O-U-G-R-O-S-S, of the Valley Mirror newspaper.
Thank you, Doug. Is it Doug and Ross is your last
It
name?
is.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Who was number 2?
I was.
Thank you.
Yes, hi. I'm Sally Rapoza from Redding, California, and thank you, Mr. Modi, for being here today. I appreciate your attendance at this meeting. Since the last meeting, I've had a chance to go through the website and kind of learn some more about the water management plan. And in your guidelines section on page 68, where it talks about climate change, it says that the intent of the climate change standard is to ensure that the IRWM plans address the effects of climate change on their regions and disclose, consider, and reduce, when possible, greenhouse gas emissions when developing and implementing projects. So that means that you guys are going to have to measure how much emissions are being used in a project, and therefore, and then it goes on to state that California is the first state to formally establish greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And the following goals are targets for California. By 2010, we have to reduce our greenhouse gas levels to year 2000 levels. By 2020 to 1990 levels, and by 2050, we have to be emissions to 80% below 1990 levels. So it's in your plan. You guys have to follow the climate change. And how many of you guys really buy into climate change? I mean, hasn't that kind of been debunked a couple of years ago? Are we the only state? Are we going to build walls around California and our climate is going to be different than the rest of the world? How are we going to make up for the pollution that China is making by reducing our own gas emissions? This is ridiculous, climate change. Think about it. Do you really buy into it?
Sally, could you tell us again where you're reading from?
I'm reading from the guidelines from your own website on page 68 and 69.
These are the DWR guidelines for an IRWMP?
IRWM.
IRWM guidelines from DWR. Okay, so that would be something that we need to look into closely. So, who was number 3? Yes.
Lori Damon from Palisadro. I'll say that up later. I'm sorry. Every county already has water plans established. In Shasta County, we had a wonderful study done by CH2 on Hill that went into every one of these things just a few years ago. Spent a lot of money on it. Where are those plans going? It seems like they would just let those go. You guys are creating something that is maybe reinventing the wheel. It feels like from here. That's why I think we're getting so much frustration. But we value our representative form of government, and we trust those that are already doing and beginning these plans. We can go in and we can talk to them, and we can go for it or not go for it. But we don't. What are you doing in each one of your counties with the plans that are already there?
Well, first one I can address the one in Shasta County with CHW2. That was an effort by the Redding Area Water Council, which is basically all the water agencies in Shasta County, the CSDs, Redding, ACID, Shasta County, others. And that was a groundwater basin plan. It looked at groundwater, not an overall plan for everything. So that plan is still there. It's still being looked at and shared with all the different agencies up there that are part of that Water Council. So they haven't abandoned that or thrown that away. But again, that's very specific to groundwater issues, not, this is a lot bigger than that.
No, it's,
We have a groundwater management plan in Colusa County as well. I think the intent here is to kind of not be in our own little areas, you know, follow county lines, but to follow watersheds and to talk about groundwater and surface water and flood control collectively, and to make sure when we do different activities in different regions that we're making sure that they fit with the whole region. And so this is a larger scale plan.
So when you're making your goals and objectives, are you doing that based on your plans you guys already have in your own counties?
I can address Amy County. We have a groundwater management plan, and oddly enough, one of the people that sits on the committee is from Shasta County, because we share a common border.
You're already doing regional management plans. Awesome.
But we share a common border for groundwater.
Yeah.
You know.
And the other thing I would add too, I think at least with Shasta County, the issue here is it wasn't to just develop a plan and then just kind of go use the water. It's sort of like, I think, to prepare ourselves and be informed as to what groundwater we do have and protect our groundwater along with the other water, the points of origin, area of origin we talked about already. So I think that Shasta County, their efforts was to sort of get ahead of the game a little bit so that when people from the states or Fed come down and say, well, just pump your groundwater and we'll take the rest of the water out of the river, we're prepared to, I think, address that issue and defend our water. So.
Not doing that already.
No.
so I did want to just bring back to what Vicki said in her staff presentation, which is that a lot of these individual entities, like city councils and county boards of supervisors, are also being encouraged to submit based on their existing planning efforts, based on their staff knowledge, to be a part of this and have that information be part of the joint 6-county development goals and objectives. So that information is coming in, hopefully. Yep. Who was number 4? Was there number 4? Thomas.
I'm Tom from Cadd County, and I also, this is my own opinion, this is a done deal already. Whatever you guys decide, and I know you're all well-meaning and trying your hardest to work this out, but it's already a done deal to me, okay? And all the paperwork that I read. But I'm against this climate change being on there also, even under religious reasons. Okay, I believe in God and I believe in Mother Nature, and climate change doesn't. Okay, that's what I feel about climate change. And then the person who wanted to know what was going to happen, what the guy was going to shoot, I was wondering what Barack Obama was going to shoot. AP News, great. Obama administration plan would kill rival birds to save the spotted owl. That's AP, okay? That's where the guns are going, I guess, to shoot the barn owl or the breeding with the spotted owl. Okay? The done deal part, I think, we have the Mill Creek Napa deal going. We have the Delta Pump Plan, which I think the Board of Supervisors in Red Bluff is going to say something about Tuesday. But anyway, they're already planning for the pumping station to pump our water south. You know, I mean, some reasons I read all this stuff that's out in the public. Now, what are you guys doing? You know, and we have issues on Antelope Creek that haven't been mentioned here either. Thank you.
So the specific issues on Antelope Creek, I hope that you will bring those in at some point. Definitely. And then the board, did you want to respond to this comment about it being a done deal?
Well, perhaps not that, but I think that the power in having a 6-county consortium developing a plan, it speaks volumes about it being a done deal of what other legislatures in the state may want. It's very difficult for one county, one jurisdiction to try to say a voice about what they oppose. But when we have 6 counties that are together saying this is what we believe in and this is the way we want to have treat our water and keep our water here, it's a much louder voice so that it doesn't become a done deal. And I think that that is the strength of this plan.
And then there was one more comment here, sir.
Yes, my name is Gary Cadd from Shasta County. I brought something forward to the TAC committee at the last meeting that I think needs to be put into the thought process what you folks have. This is a document here from the Shasta County Regional Climate Action Plan. It's a draft of their plan. On page 12, talks about the Senate Bill SBX 77, at Senate Bill Extraordinary Session 7, Bill number 7. And what this bill does, it was passed in 09, what this bill does is require all water suppliers, water producers, to reduce urban per capita water consumption by 2020. They're going to reduce it by 20%. And the way they'll come up with their 20% is they're going to take an average of water usage from 1994 to 2004, 11 years. Take those 11 years, take the average and then reduce it by 20%. This is something you folks need to keep in mind also of what you're doing here, because we're going to be reducing the water that we're going to have available to us for farms, for all of us. So this bill needs to be looked into. You folks need to be looking at the bill and keep that in mind while you're doing your negotiations and deliberations. Then also something just popped into my mind here that this is on your agenda. The last item on the bottom of it brings something to mind to me, because it's been mentioned that we've got to protect our water so the state doesn't take our water away from us. The very people that have been behind putting together what we have here today are the people that take our water away from us. Now, you folks have in your agenda today talks about climate change. Last issue down here on the back page says climate change. DRW is Climate Change Technical Advisory Group. Well, Shasta County is working on climate change. We've got DRW working on climate change. You folks are working on climate change. All of us in the community are having problems with some of the issues that are coming up and being proposed with climate change. We out here are going to be a big, monstrous pushback. It's already happening in Shasta County, that there's going to be a pushback on this climate change and some of the issues that are coming up. And I bring that forward to you so you folks have it in your thought process when you're going through this, to watch what's happening. Because we just talked about all of this that we're talking about here, the Delta Smelt issue. The court just ruled here 10 days ago that there was false science that they used to do that, and that whole issue down there is up in the air, and it probably can get thrown out in the courts. If that winds up that way, this whole water issue goes away. We have a lot more water that's going to stay here.
So we are trying to stick to our public comment
I know.
guidelines. There will be another chance to comment. Thank you. Is it Gary? I'm sorry, what's your name, Gary?
Gary Cadd.
Gary, thank you.
Introduce myself to start.
Yep. Were there any further public comments on this item? I haven't been very strict about enforcing this, but we do want you to comment on the item that was just presented about public outreach and the summary of public outreach. There will be another opportunity to comment at the end of the agenda about anything that was not on the board's agenda that you want to address. So any other comments on this item? Thank you. And so then, Steve, did you want to introduce yourself? So next up is Monique Day, also from West Yost, to talk about the draft goals and objectives that were presented to the TAC and some of the feedback that we got and where we're going with that.
Okay. Okay, so you should also have a handout with the presentation slides today. I want to remind you again, so we already talked about these 16 elements. I guess the board is down here.
You have those handouts for us?
There were a couple extras, but I think we're out, so I'll have to just look at the screen.
There's a couple right here.
Yeah, there may be a couple extras. We have one for every board member. Thank you. There's a couple extras. Does anybody else want a copy? Okay, so I just wanted to remind the board about the 16 elements of the IRWP that were required to put in there to be made by DWR. So the governance and finances
mostly complete based on the tech memos that you approved at your last meeting. And then the objectives that we are in the process of working on is one of the pieces. And then also the stakeholder involvement coordination, that's already begun. The items that are in black are ones that we haven't really started our efforts on, but this is just to remind you why we're talking about objectives. That's part of the plan. Some pieces of the requirements of objectives is that they are required by DWR. We have to establish them. They have to be part of the plan. They must be ranked in the plan, or we have to have a description of why we chose not to rank them. So you don't have to rank, but you have to address the topic of ranking. And then another piece, I don't know why it keeps going off of the slideshow. Okay, it's very touchy. And then the third element is that it must be measurable. And that's something we'll talk about. We talked about this at the TAC, but once we get to a point where the TAC is fairly comfortable with the draft goals and objectives, then we'll sit back and look at how to measure each of the objectives, because in our plan we need to identify how we plan on measuring each objective. And measurement of objectives can be very expensive, so it's really up to those that are going to be implementing the objectives how they want to choose to measure them. And in your agenda packet, I have a couple examples from DWR of different sample objectives and then potential types of measurement that can be quantitative or qualitative, but they will have to be stated in the plan. So, and I also wanted to mention that I brought a binder that we can pass around. This just lists the DWR guidance on objectives, the actual section, and then also the DWR guidelines. And then also I'm going to mention part of our development of the goals and objectives is that we looked at several other neighboring regions. So I'll just start this binder over here, and if you want, you can pass it around as we're talking. So the strategic development team I'm here representing today, that's part of the consultant team, and we basically act as staff to the technical advisory committee. And so we put together this first draft, and the draft that you have in your packet is the same one that the TAC has seen. And we have not made any changes to it, except we did number all of the objectives so that it's just easier in our conversation today. Other than that, there was no change. But we did take into account the DWR statewide priorities and the guidelines. And then we also reviewed all the public comments that Laura just reviewed for you that we received in January, the results of the outreach meetings, the results of the questionnaires, and we just looked for what the common themes were from that outreach process and determined what the common needs and aspirations seemed to be for the region. And we also looked at what other RW regions had done for goals and objectives, keeping in mind that obviously each region develops their own goals and objectives for their own purposes, and every area is a little different, and maybe these plans were done 5 years ago and they're going to update their own goals and objectives, but it didn't help us with some wording and making sure we didn't miss something, because maybe nobody commented on a certain thing, but we did recognize, oh, that's a good idea. So we tried to keep these very comprehensive, and so some of those examples of goals and objectives from other regions are in that binder as well. And then we also just drew on the professional knowledge of each of the members on the strategic development team. Because each of the members of that team are very familiar with this area and have different areas of expertise. We have a fisheries biologist expert on the panel and some others. So then I'm going to talk about the process we went through to develop the goals and objectives a little bit more. We did look at the need to address the region's needs and aspirations. So before we started looking at objectives, we decided, okay, what are the main goals that we see emerging from these needs? We came up with 5 basic goals that are in your packet. And then we developed objectives to support each of those goals. And as we're developing those objectives, we kind of realized we need to have something that will just pull this all together and explain that this is for the benefit of the Northern Sacramento Valley region, and we wanted to clarify who's doing the plan and who is it benefiting. So we came up with this overarching goal that we put at the beginning of the goals and objectives. So, and actually, I think this is Vicki Newland's request, so I just put it in bold, single page before you get to goals and objectives listed. So that's the overarching goal, but it was just an idea of kind of something that we wanted people to read before they got into the details of the objectives. And then we did go ahead and assign a rank to it just because we wanted to get the conversation going and we wanted to start getting comments. And so we came up with different categories for prioritizing. And as we were doing this too, we did think about measurability. We didn't assign a certain method of how to measure each objective because it's going to be a lot of work, and honestly, many of the goals may be rewritten. We've gotten comments on them. So we didn't want to waste a lot of time doing that, but we did look at a couple of them to make sure that we were generally drafting the objectives so that they could be measurable. And sometimes if we looked at it and thought, you know what, we can't even accomplish that until we get this established baseline information, then we would write another objective and say, okay, establish this baseline information and make that a foundational objective that would have to be completed before you could even do that next objective. So it was an iterative process. We developed more objectives as we started thinking about measurability and we started thinking about ranking. And some of the ranking also made us end up breaking out some certain objectives so that we could rank them better. An example would be increase water supply reliability for environmental purposes, recreational purposes, agricultural interests. If we want to rank each of those a little differently, we have to pull them out and make them separate objectives instead of just lumping them all together. So anyway, it was an iterative process that we went through to come up with our draft list. And then the goals, I was just going to read them very quickly, make sure that we're all on the same page. I think most people have read through these, but the first goal that we came up with is to ensure adequate and reliable water supply to meet existing and future needs of communities, agriculture, and environmental resources, and that was to address the number one comment emerging, that was water supply. It was a very hot topic. The second goal was to minimize flood risk to people and property. The third goal we came up with was ensure water quality meets beneficial uses. Fourth goal was conserve, restore, and enhance aquatic, riparian, and watershed resources. And then the fifth goal was facilitate long-term cooperation to enhance water management. Okay. So again, as we were coming up with the list, we really tried to be more comprehensive because we want to have you make the decisions as to what we should actually cut. So in general, if we weren't sure if we should leave something in or take it out, we left it in. So this list is more comprehensive than not. At least we attempted to make it that way. We tried to make it responsive to these public comments, and we attempted to make the objectives measurable and attempted to make them in line with statewide guidelines. So as we write these, and we go back and check the statewide guidelines, make sure that they are in line. And again, the measurability helped us develop a lot of our foundational objectives. So the ranking that we came up with was that we decided we needed to have a foundational category so that there is a baseline set of objectives that need to be accomplished before other important objectives can be worked on. So a lot of that is data collection, establishing baseline data, sharing data with each other. And then the other categories that we came up with were critical, and then high, and medium. We specifically don't have a low category because we felt that if there was going to be something of low priority, it probably wouldn't be in the plan. So everything that's listed we felt was important, and so we made that distinction. We labeled things critical if we believed that they were related to public health or safety. If it was related to economics, it would be high. Medium high was environmental ecosystem type projects or type objectives. And that's our response to some of the comments that came in saying that economics should be more important than the environment, but really it's your decision. And we, based on our second round of public comments, we're kind of questioning maybe that medium high should, the environmental should be changed to a different ranking. And we don't have any decisions here before you today, but we would be interested in your recommendations to the TAC on how to handle that, because we did have a lot of comments come in on, we think this should be this ranking, and it's really the board's decision how you want to handle that. And also, in your packet, the objectives, within each goal, we have them listed in order of priority, so we have foundational, and then critical, and then high. But otherwise, they're not in any particular order. And I also want to mention that there's lots of options for prioritizing. You don't have to do it the way we did it. This is just one suggested way. You could do something different and say, here's the top priorities for just Volusia County, here's the top priorities for Tehama County, and so you could do it by region. We chose to do it by topic. We do want to keep it, we thought it would be a good idea to keep it as regional plans, so we have it just region-wide, but it's your choice. You could also number them and just have priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and going down the list. We ended up grouping them, so it's kind of a tiered system that we chose. That's something that you can think about as well. Okay, so recent developments. We had February 16th, we had a TAC meeting here. And in that meeting, as Vicki described, we formed the TAC subcommittee to work on the draft goals and objectives with the strategic development team. And they agreed to kind of extend the timeline and give it a couple more meetings to work through the draft goals and objectives before they came to the board with a recommendation. And then they set a deadline of March 2nd to receive written comments. So March 2nd, last Friday, we received 49 written comments by 5 o'clock. But we received another 5 or so over the weekend, and I'm sure we'll continue to receive them in. But for the first round, we did get about 49 written comments. And then the tax subcommittee met last Friday. The strategic development team is going to meet today. They're going to meet again tomorrow. We're going to meet together on Thursday. So it's a quick process, and we will be developing a redraft of the draft goals and objectives. So I did want to point out the timeline. You may remember this slide from most other meetings. I think we put this up at every meeting. But just a reminder, the entire RWP does need to be completed by September of 2013. And we are here almost towards the end of where we projected phase 1 to end. The suggestion is to move the timeline out, but by doing that, we will be cutting into our phase 2. So if we don't decide on our goals and objectives until May or June, that does push out our phase 2 activities. And so we'll have to do phase 2 a little bit quicker, which is fine, we can do it, but I just want you to be aware of that extended timeline. And as I already mentioned, we're going to have a strategic development team meeting this afternoon, so I will take any of the comments I received today to the strategic development team, and then in addition to all the written comments that we've received, we're going to start a redraft and do that process this week, and then the redraft should go in the TAC packet for the March 15th meeting that will be coming out at the end of the week. And then it's a meeting March 15th with the TAC, and then April 19th they have their next meeting. And so the next is to have a discussion. The one thing I want to mention before we start a discussion of the draft goals and objectives is kind of some highlights from the February 16th TAC meeting. So in general, the TAC felt that the priority that was the suggested form of prioritization was a good idea, and there were some positive comments about the need to collect data, the baseline information, and data sharing. And so I think we're on the right track for that. Some of the other comments were that they felt strongly that there should be a separate goal for home rule of water rights, also a separate goal for wastewater. Some other comments were that they didn't want to incorporate statewide priorities. I think that was coming out of the public comments. But again, that's a requirement that you do address statewide priorities, so that's a decision that you would want to make. And then there was general concern about conjunctive use, and then water transfer guidelines. There's a couple objectives that refer to water transfer guidelines, so that's just another thing to think about. And then in the written comments that you received, reading them over the weekend, the major theme that emerged was that there was a lot of concern about the fact that we don't know that much information about the Tuscan Aquifer, and that conjunctive use should not be listed as an objective, or that if it is, it should be termed conjunctive management. So there's kind of a terminology thing, but also a lot of public comments regarding just the need for better science, better scientific studies, better knowledge of the aquifer system before we propose conjunctive management plans. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then there's also a comment about, is this board managing just water, or is it water and land? Because in our overarching goal, we do address water and land because we feel like it's connected, but obviously this is not a board that's making decisions on land use. We just want to coordinate. So something else to be aware of. And then prioritization categories. In the public comments, a lot of folks felt that different objectives should be prioritized different. So we don't have the specific example for you here today, but I just want you to be aware that that's what we've been hearing. So with that, I want to start a discussion with the board members, starting with the goals. Are you comfortable with the goals? And is that, there's the overarching goal, and then there's the 5 primary category goals. And then after that, we can talk about objectives and specific objectives you have comments about. And then what are your feelings about prioritization? Do you like the suggested format? And then you have changes to different objectives, how they should be ranked. And then we can touch on measurement, although I think at this point it's probably a decision to make at the TAC level as to how we want to choose to measure objectives. And I think at your next meeting, when we actually propose something for you to adopt, you may want to talk about measurement in more detail. So maybe today we don't need to talk about it too much, but if you have comments about it, feel free to state them. So, yes.
The information that I like to get is, I'd rather have it be inclusive than exclusive. In other words, just because something seems to be a minor issue with somebody, don't exclude it. Present it. So, and it looks like you're doing that.
We're trying.
Monique, are you taking comments at this time on merely the goals, or are we going to bridge and go into objectives as well?
You can comment on any of it. I just thought to keep the discussion organized, maybe we start with goals, but if it is all tied together, just go ahead and
I have a question regarding goal number 2, objective number 2. Develop flood risk reduction plans to provide 200-year protection for urban and 100-year protection for rural communities. Of course, the standard that we deal with from a city standpoint right now is mitigate to the 100-year event. Can you describe to me what the 200, where that came from and what that?
Kramer probably is on our strategic development team. He's the flood expert, so I think you would have to answer that question. Unfortunately, I don't recall where that came from. Do you have a comment on that?
FEMA.
Oh,
well, FEMA, that's 100 years.
2.
Actually, so when SB 5 was passed, it required urban and urbanizing communities, so communities that reach currently 1,000 or higher are required to meet a 200-year level of flood protection. So that's. That does ring a bell. I know he was talking about FEMA.
Yeah, yes, it was. Of course, for a community like Corning, that has really far-reaching effects. Little gradient from one side of the city to another, and significant areas of 100-year impact, and 200 will.
We're going to start the Birch and Jewel Creek dikes.
Thank you.
Just want to clarify that I believe that requirement did pass in SB 5, so that is now a state requirement. So we're just, the consulting didn't make that up, that's in state law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On our first goal, to ensure the adequate and reliable water supply being existing in future needs of communities, agriculture, and environmental resources, I would suggest that we reinforce that this is for our particular region, to say it's for this regional's community, agriculture, and environmental resources.
Yeah, and that was a common comment, and I think that we will end up that change. Yeah.
So Monique, on the overarching, the main, I guess the overarching goal, you know, the part about land resources with mutual support for projects sponsored by local authorities, and I'm concerned that we focus on projects when there may be a lot of other ways in which we achieve our goals. And so you know, my suggestion might be to join right where water ends and cut out that and land resource, and then start with through collaborative, mutually beneficial solutions. I don't know if that there's other issues, but if we focus, I think, on projects and funding, we're making the assumption that there's somehow going to be funding coming through from the state, and I don't know if we want that to be part of our foundation.
I kind of want to report Louis' comments. Very important. For the tax subcommittee invited Leigh and I both to sit in last week and go over these draft goals and objectives, and both Leigh and I were there, and Vicki asked us to come to provide some connectivity with the board through the tax subcommittee process to look at these, and so I'm happy to do that, and I will also be at the meeting tomorrow, and we didn't get through all these, but the overarching goal is one of the things that we discussed at length, and I think there's going to be, you'll see a significant change to this draft. I think we all came to a pretty good consensus on a much shorter, more concise overarching goal. Vicki, we kind of agreed that we were going to change that, provide a different draft to that.
Right. We took in the comments that came to us through March 2nd. So we had what they provided, the consultants provided us, which is what we have here. Then we got more comments from the general public. And then the technical advisory committee was joined by chair and vice chair of the board. And we went through it, taking it from this big down and making it more concise, making it more responsive and reflective of our region. Then we're going to discuss that at the technical advisory committee and have feedback from the rest of the technical advisory committee as well as the public. And then we're going to bring that forward again. So I think what Monique is asking for is if there's any goal or objective on here that you see that you don't quite understand, because we're going to go move forward and work with these and bring it back to a little bit more concise.
Yeah, I think it's great to have board comments today. It might be helpful to this process, but I didn't mean to derail that. I just want to say we we're trying to have some connectivity with the tax, so we do this in a manner that represents some of the board's thoughts through the perspective. And I think that overarching goal, we are going to come back with a draft that does not focus on specific projects as much as just an overall collaborative effort for management purposes.
Yeah, and tacking on to that, I think Lewis's comment was very good. We're really talking about collective and collaborative water management, not necessarily looking at specific projects and items like that. And if that's the general consensus of the board or philosophy of the board, then we're on the right track by condensing down this overarching goal. If we're not, we need to hear about it now. Okay. Yes.
One thought in reviewing the key findings from the questionnaires, one of the key findings was water rights. And is that adequately reflected in our goals?
I think it will be.
Yeah. The TAC did have a separate comment where they thought it should be a separate goal.
Okay.
So it will come in your next version.
Okay, good.
Any other thoughts about the overarching goal?
Well, I think just a thought when you're working on those, and I appreciate you guys doing that, is to focus on what's in kind of our scope and possibility, so our goals are things that we can actually work on, as opposed to things that really happen outside of this board. So we're only going to have a certain bandwidth of activities, and if we're talking about goals that are outside of that, maybe they should be categorized differently. I really see the very last goal that we have is facilitating long-term cooperation to enhance water management. That might be the primary thing we actually do. A place where everybody can come and easily be educated and learn about each other's issues. It's hard to say it's more important than making sure we have water, but and I think categorizing it as a foundational issue helps. But keep that in mind.
Is there any other comments you want to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the overarching, good comments made so far. I was kind of looking at the last part of the sentence too, and I don't know if that's going to be changed or not either. The mutually beneficial solutions of the capacity of any one entity. And it's sort of kind of put us all in the same group and we're all going to agree that, or I can see where there could be solutions or projects that benefit just one agency, but we all agree it's a good project.
Right. Yeah. And I think the flavor of the new goal that we're working on nullifies that sort of mentality as a non-big it's here.
It's brilliant.
What's that?
She says it's brilliant.
It is brilliant. But yeah,
and the reason I say that, and I've heard some of the public comments today, but elsewhere too, is that there's certainly a concern from individuals that, for instance, that Shasta County would just give up their rights to do the project, or anybody else here, and we would just acquiesce to the regional plan, and I think that's not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to find common ground and work together.
too. That's true. We're trying to work together, but we're not necessarily trying to impose a regional requirement on individual counties. Each county still has its autonomy.
Well, and each water agency, they have their
water
own
agency
priorities
so
to focus on as well.
We need to make sure that that's reflected in the overarching goal, to not imply that we're doing any more than we are obligated to.
Right.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board with regard to the goals and/or objectives? We can go, if you would like, we can turn it over to the public and ask the public what they might have to add to those thoughts.
Okay.
My name is June Cooper. I'm concerned about the measurement because we have kind of skipped over that. And I'm wondering if we are going to measure the water wells on private property. And are you going to also take water measurements of the farmers? Because different farmers use different amount of water. And are you going to make it so the farmers get their share? And that the property owners don't want people on their property? Thank you.
Can I answer that? Yes. Very specifically, that is a county function, okay? And within Tehama County, I know that we have certain wells that are called monitoring wells where the landowner has agreed to allow measurement of depth twice a year, and that's the extent of it. That's not part of this plan that I'm doing. The measurement is how we measure whether we've met the goals and objectives. Not measuring ground, it's the same word, but they're two different things.
Yeah, I think there's two distinctions there too. One is we're not talking about monitoring individuals' wells and how much water. What we're talking about is monitoring the groundwater basin.
The basin.
And that's with voluntary compliance or participation. But I think I've heard this rumor that the state, and there was an effort last year, the state to meter people's wells. We're not talking about that. That's never been a discussion with this board. We're not going down that path. So when I keep hearing that we're going to meter people's wells, I don't think there's any intent or even ability for this board to do that.
That's correct.
No, it's not. It's not state law. There was a bill that tried to make it that didn't go through, but there is state law which would.
To get funds, get grant funding, sometimes you have to do monitoring.
No, but what Ryan's talking about is where we have to try to monitor groundwater basins. That's different than monitoring your individual well.
We have, within Tehama County, we have what they're called key wells, where we watch and have for a number of years, watch what the groundwater does, just to make sure that we still have enough to do what we need to do. But that's the only reason it's there. Okay. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Okay, Tom?
I'm Tom from Tehama County again. Well, I'm honestly really worried about this difference between surface water and groundwater. Once they get all the groundwater that they can get, that they won't take all the surface water they can get, that they will take the groundwater next, because they're putting it all into one. It's rainwater starts out, and it's our water. And even though the counties have separate rules and regulations against that groundwater transportation in some way or manner, once they put that all into one water, they have a right to that. You know, but I know our Tama County, where our origin rule is in court right now on the Sacramento River, and the right to the water. Once they get that all together, it seems like they will have a right to our groundwater anyway.
Well, they're gonna have a hell of a fight to do it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about public doctrine mentality that you hear in a lot of the large cities and a lot of the large highly populated areas about how the water resource of this state is this state's water resource and it should decide what to do. This plan is not about that, and I don't think anyone on this board will buy into that. This plan is probably one of the ways that we can contradict that argument by showing them that we're up here, we're working together, we're using our resources efficiently, and what we do with our resources is our decision, not theirs. That's the reason I'm on this board, and I certainly will fight against that public doctrine mentality until my last breath. So I do understand what you're talking about, but this plan is not buying into that mentality.
I know it's in the state water plan.
Yes.
And when they want to change the definition to water as a public commodity.
Yes.
And the problem is this integrated regional water plan is a property for E1 funding grant program.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to follow guidelines to get your money to be prioritized to get your projects done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't do it the right way, you're not going to be approved for your money.
Mm-hmm.
You have to follow these specific guidelines, and I know that you don't want to, but are you willing to stand up for that, even though you may not get your money?
Did anybody want to go comment on that?
I'm thinking the DWR may want to comment on that.
I just thought maybe I just save all these potential comments in the portion when I talk, and then that might be better.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I'd suggest that I hope that we would say, hey, if they want us to do something that we don't think is in our interest, that we don't accept federal funds. You know, I mean, there's DWR will often try to get these statewide objectives, and then they'll condition a grant on achieving those statewide objectives. If we don't agree with those statewide objectives, we can say no to that funding.
Right.
And I think that's the purpose of putting the plan together, is to say, what are our goals? What do we collectively believe is the right path? And then we know to say, oh yeah, that's not in our path. And so I hope this plan allows us to collectively do that, so we have a larger voice that can say it.
And I do too. And it's very difficult for me to chair a meeting because you're supposed to be the moderator between all the different ideas going on. But so I will speak from a personal standpoint that I agree with what Louis is saying, and I also understand that yes, we have to address specific issues in this plan. We have to talk about climate change. We do have SBA 7, which does have the 20% by 20 for urban areas, and they talk about water conservation efforts. But what I always talk about in public meetings and when I'm talking to the rest of our friends from the rest of the state, I tell them that the North State doesn't really have the same kind of issues. We really don't need to conserve water up here because we have a lot of water up here. Now, granted, we might look at ways to be more efficient in our water, and so I would talk water efficiency, but I won't talk water conservation with them. And I don't support 20 by 20 personally, and I'm willing to fight for that. Good. Okay, so in this, and climate change, I agree, in my mind, is bunk with regard to the North State. So in my mind, the way that our plan comes out, it expresses those concerns and our ideas that will in a lot of ways be contrary to the rest of the state and their water needs. The rest of the state, when you go to these integrated regional water management meetings, which I have gone to, the rest of the state is talking about water crisis and how to conserve water and how to find ways to get more mileage out of a drop of water. And when they come to me and they ask, what are you doing about the water crisis? My response is, we don't have a water crisis in the North State. We have a legislative crisis where our water is being legislated out of the North State. And so one of my goals with regard to this plan is to bring that to light in this plan and to work with the rest of the counties in this plan to bring forward the situation that we're fine up here and we'd like to manage our water the best we can as long as we can keep all your regulations and other ideas out of it. The counties, as you asked earlier, the counties have individual water plans. But as in some of the public comment says, even though the counties have individual water plans and they're looking at their county specifically for the protection of their county, I certainly understand that and support that. But now with a regional water management plan like that, then these individual plans can be evaluated and looked at from the other counties to make sure that their individual plans aren't necessarily hurting their neighboring counties. Because the problem with our water is it knows no political boundary. It's going to go where it's going to go. So in certain cases, even though we do have our individual water management plans, we need to ensure that we're working more careful with our neighboring counties so that what we're doing isn't adversely impacting them. And in a perfect world, this sort of a regional plan is the medium to do that. So yes, it does seem like there's a lot of layered plans and why are we doing it? But this is really the first time that the North State is really working together, counties to counties, to come up with that uniform voice to argue against all of these over-regulatory requirements from the rest of the state. I'm not going to speak for the rest of the board, but my belief is that they're not buying into a lot of these new requirements that are coming forward, and I think it will be reflected in this plan. Okay.
I'd love to have a consensus on that.